Chosen ones, listen closely, because this message is not random and it is not emotional coincidence. The reason this woman is mad that you cut communication has very little to do with what she is showing on the surface and everything to do with what was happening behind the scenes when you were still accessible. When you walked away, you didn't just remove conversation, you removed access. You didn't just stop replying, you disrupted a flow she had grown comfortable feeding from. And what they didn't tell you is that silence from a chosen one is louder than any argument could ever be. It shakes people who were used to having influence over your thoughts, your reactions, your energy, and your direction. You need to understand something about chosen ones. When you withdraw, it is never passive. It is spiritual. You don't cut communication out of spite. You do it out of clarity. And clarity is dangerous to people who benefited from your confusion. While you were talking, explaining, apologizing, and overextending, she had leverage. She knew how to pull you back with words, with emotion, with memory, with guilt. But the moment you went silent, the script flipped. Now she has no stage, no audience, no feedback loop. That is why the anger feels disproportionate. That is why the reaction seems extreme. You didn't attack her, yet she feels attacked. You didn't accuse her, yet she feels exposed. That is because silence reveals what words were covering. What they didn't tell you is that some people only value you when they can reach you. They don't miss you, they miss the version of you that was available on demand. They miss the access, not the connection. And when a chosen one cuts communication, it forces people to sit with themselves. It forces reflection they were avoiding. It brings unresolved motives to the surface. That woman is mad because your absence is making her confront questions she never wanted to answer. Questions like why she needed control, why she needed validation, why she needed your presence to feel secure. And instead of processing that internally, it comes out as frustration directed at you. Chosen ones, there are people who never planned to walk with you into your next season. They only planned to benefit from you in the last one. When you stepped into discernment, you disrupted timelines, you interrupted patterns, you broke a dynamic that worked in her favor. And now she is angry, not because you were wrong, but because you were right sooner than she expected. The truth is, some connections only survive when you are silent about your boundaries. The moment you enforce them, the illusion collapses. You were never meant to keep explaining yourself to someone who already understood but hoped you wouldn't act on it. And what they didn't tell you is that when you finally stop communicating, it is usually after you have already tried everything else. You didn't just wake up one day and disappear. You spoke, you warned, you expressed, you gave chances, you extended grace. Silence was not your first option, it was your last line of defense. But from the outside, it looked sudden. From the inside, it was overdue. That woman is mad because she can feel the shift. She can sense that you are no longer reachable in the same way. Even if she doesn't consciously understand it, spiritually she knows the door closed, and people who are used to leaving doors open for their convenience panic when they realize they no longer have a key. Your silence is not punishment, it is protection. And protection often feels like rejection to those who were never meant to have permanent access to you. What they didn't tell you is that chosen ones trigger people without saying a word. Your growth makes people uncomfortable. Your detachment feels like abandonment to those who relied on your emotional labor. And instead of respecting your need for peace, they interpret it as betrayal. But listen carefully, you are not responsible for how someone reacts to your obedience to clarity. You are not obligated to stay connected to someone who benefited from keeping you drained. When you cut communication, you stopped feeding a dynamic that was one-sided. You stopped reinforcing a narrative where you were always the one to fix, to reassure, to bend. And now that woman is mad because the mirror has turned toward her. She has to face the role she played. She has to sit with the absence of your energy. She has to confront the fact that you chose yourself. And for some people, your self-respect feels like an insult because it reminds them of where they fell short. Chosen ones, understand this. Not everyone who reacts to your silence wants reconciliation. Some want control restored. Some want access back. Some want the version of you that questioned yourself. But that version of you is gone. You leveled up the moment you chose peace over proximity. And what they didn't tell you is that silence is often the final test. It reveals who respected you and who only tolerated you while they benefited. You may feel the pull to explain yourself one last time. You may feel the urge to soften the silence so she doesn't feel hurt. But remember, your responsibility is not to manage someone else's emotions at the expense of your own stability. The anger you're sensing is not because you were unclear. It's because you were clear enough to walk away. And clarity terrifies people who thrived in ambiguity. There are people who only feel powerful when you are present and uncertain. The moment you became grounded, their influence diminished. That woman is mad because she can no longer predict you. She can no longer pull you back with the same tactics. She can no longer rely on your availability to validate her position in your life. And instead of adapting, she resists. Instead of reflecting, she reacts. What they didn't tell you is that chosen ones are often misunderstood when they choose solitude. People assume you are cold, distant, or bitter, when in reality you are finally listening to yourself. Silence is not absence of love, it is presence of wisdom. You didn't stop caring, you stopped compromising, and that distinction matters even if others refuse to see it. There is a reason peace came back the moment you cut communication. There is a reason your mind feels clearer, your sleep deeper, your intuition sharper. That connection was noisy. It demanded too much explanation, too much emotional currency, too much self-abandonment, and your spirit knew it before your mind caught up. When you finally honored that knowing, alignment returned. But alignment always exposes misalignment elsewhere. Chosen ones, some people get angry when you stop being the version of yourself that fit into their expectations. They liked you when you were accommodating, forgiving, reachable at all hours. They struggle with you when you are selective, discerning, and quiet. But growth will always offend those who benefited from your lack of boundaries, and the anger you're sensing is confirmation that the shift was necessary. You didn't lose anything by cutting communication. You gained yourself back. And what they didn't tell you is that sometimes the price of self-respect is being misunderstood by those who never respected you in the first place. That woman's anger is not your burden to carry. It is her invitation to heal, reflect, and grow. Whether she accepts it or not is out of your hands. Chosen ones stay grounded, stay observant, stay silent when needed, because silence, when chosen consciously, is not weakness. It is mastery. And as you continue to move forward, maintaining this rhythm, maintaining this clarity, maintaining this distance, you will begin to notice how the noise around you shifts, how the emotional pressure changes, how the dynamics that once drained you lose their grip, and how the very thing that made her mad becomes the very thing that finally sets you free. Because when you no longer explain yourself, when you no longer chase understanding, when you no longer reopen doors that were closed for a reason, you begin to step fully into a space where your peace is no longer negotiable and your energy is no longer available to those who only recognize your value when they feel its absence. And in that space, something deeper starts to happen within you, something that continues to unfold as you move forward without looking back, without responding to provocation, without returning to conversations that already showed you everything you needed to know as you continue walking. Because when you keep walking in that silence, you start to realize that the real shift wasn't just external, it was internal. Something inside you settled. Something inside you stopped negotiating with discomfort. And that is what truly unsettles people who are used to having a say in your emotional world. They can feel that you are no longer internally accessible, and that is far more threatening than physical distance. You could be in the same room and still unreachable because your spirit has moved on. Chosen ones, what they didn't tell you is that when you cut communication, you stop participating in a cycle that kept repeating itself. The same conversations, the same misunderstandings, the same emotional spikes followed by temporary calm. You finally saw that resolution was never the goal, repetition was. And once you recognized the pattern, you stepped out of it. People who benefit from cycles panic when someone breaks them because cycles create predictability, and predictability creates control. That woman's anger is rooted in the loss of predictability. She no longer knows where she stands with you. She no longer knows how to read you. She no longer knows which version of you she's dealing with, because the version that kept explaining is gone. And instead of asking herself why you felt the need to withdraw, she focuses on the withdrawal itself. That is easier than accountability. You need to understand that some people don't want closure. They want continuation. They want the door left slightly open so they can return when it suits them. Silence slams that door without drama. It doesn't argue. It doesn't justify. It simply closes. And people who were comfortable coming and going react strongly when access is revoked permanently. Chosen ones, there is power in not reacting. There is power in letting people sit with the consequences of how they treated you. When you keep responding, you keep cushioning the impact. When you go silent, the truth hits harder. That woman is mad because she finally has to feel what you felt for a long time. The confusion, the distance, the unanswered questions, the emotional gap. And instead of recognizing it as empathy earned, she experiences it as injustice. What they didn't tell you is that your silence is teaching lessons you could never teach with words. You already explained your boundaries. You already expressed your needs. You already showed where things hurt. Silence is not lack of communication. It is communication without language. And for those who ignored your words, it is the only form they can no longer ignore. As you continue forward, you may notice attempts to re-enter your space. subtle messages, indirect reactions, emotional bait, moments designed to pull a response out of you. This is not coincidence. It is a test. The anger often shifts into curiosity, then into nostalgia, then into attempts at reconciliation that avoid accountability. But remember, chosen ones, access without change leads to the same outcome. And your growth depends on discernment, not emotion. You are not cold for protecting your peace. You are not heartless for choosing distance. You are not wrong for prioritizing clarity over chaos. People who benefited from your emotional availability will always frame your boundaries as cruelty, but boundaries only feel cruel to those who are crossing them freely. That woman's frustration also comes from realizing that she cannot rewrite the narrative anymore. When you were still talking, she could interpret your words to suit her version of events. Silence removes interpretation. It leaves only actions and outcomes do not lie. The outcome is that you chose yourself. The outcome is that you stopped pouring into something that was not reciprocated. The outcome is that you listened to your intuition instead of your attachment. Chosen ones, attachment is loud. Intuition is quiet. That is why silence aligns you with truth. When you are no longer emotionally reactive, you can see clearly who added value and who drained it. You can see who respected your energy and who exploited it. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Awareness alone changes how you move. What they didn't tell you is that some people only feel close to you when you are struggling. Your healing creates distance because they no longer recognize their role. When you cut communication, you remove the dynamic that allowed them to feel needed, superior, or influential. And instead of celebrating your growth, they resist it. Anger becomes a defense against feeling irrelevant. You may feel moments of guilt, especially if you are empathetic by nature. You may wonder if you were too harsh, too sudden, too firm. But ask yourself this: how many times did you stay longer than you should have? How many times did you suppress your discomfort to keep peace? How many times did you explain yourself hoping to be understood? Silence didn't come from impatience, it came from exhaustion. Chosen one's exhaustion is often the final signal. When your spirit is tired of repeating lessons your mind already learned, it calls for withdrawal. And withdrawal is not punishment, it is recalibration. You needed space to hear yourself again. You needed distance to remember who you were before you started shrinking to maintain connection. That woman is mad because she can sense that you are no longer shrinking. You are no longer adjusting your tone, your timing, your truth. You are no longer available for emotional negotiations that leave you depleted. And instead of asking how to meet you at this new level, she wants you to return to the old one. But evolution does not move backward. What they didn't tell you is that chosen ones outgrow people quietly. There is no dramatic announcement, no public explanation, just a gradual realization followed by decisive action. Silence is the natural result of that realization, and people who are left behind often react with anger because they feel powerless to stop what has already happened. As you maintain this silence, you may notice how much mental space opens up, how much emotional weight lifts, how much clarity returns. That is not accidental. That connection was occupying more space than it deserved. It was loud where it should have been peaceful, confusing where it should have been clear. And now that it is gone, your nervous system is recalibrating. Chosen one's peace feels unfamiliar at first when you've been accustomed to emotional turbulence. You may even mistake calm for emptiness. But emptiness is simply space waiting to be filled with something aligned. And alignment never arrives in chaos. It arrives in stillness. That stillness is what you protected when you cut communication. That woman's anger is temporary. Your growth is permanent. Her reaction is about loss of influence, not loss of love. Love respects boundaries. Love adapts. Love reflects. Anger demands access. Anger demands explanation. Anger demands your energy. And you are no longer available to feed that demand. What they didn't tell you is that not everyone deserves an explanation at the level you evolved to. Some explanations are wasted on people committed to misunderstanding you. Silence saves you from repeating yourself to those who already decided their version of the story. And you don't need to correct narratives that don't affect your purpose. Chosen ones, the more you resist the urge to respond, the stronger you become. Not because silence is power by itself, but because restraint builds self-trust. Every time you choose not to engage, you reinforce the belief that your peace matters. That belief changes how you move in every area of your life. It sharpens your discernment. It raises your standards. It filters your connections. And as you continue walking forward, there will be moments when memories surface. Moments when you remember the good times, the laughter, the familiarity. That does not mean you made the wrong choice. It means you are human. You can honor what was without reopening what hurt. You can appreciate the lesson without repeating it. What they didn't tell you is that chosen ones often mistake nostalgia for intuition. Nostalgia looks backward, intuition looks forward. Silence keeps you facing the right direction. And every step you take without looking back strengthens your alignment with where you are meant to be. That woman may never understand why you left. She may never acknowledge her role. She may continue to frame your silence as cruelty or abandonment. But her understanding is not required for your growth. Closure does not come from conversation, it comes from acceptance. And you accepted what the situation was, not what you hoped it would become. Chosen ones, continue honoring the quiet. Continue choosing yourself without explanation. Continue trusting that what left your life made room for something more aligned. Because as you move deeper into this season of discernment, as you remain grounded in this stillness, as you resist the pull to re-engage with what drained you, you will begin to notice subtle confirmations, internal shifts, and external changes that affirm you were guided to step away for a reason. And as this unfolds, the story continues, the clarity deepens, and the journey moves forward without the need to return to conversations that already showed you everything you needed to know. As you keep walking in this awareness and this restraint and this quiet strength, allowing what no longer serves you to remain behind while you continue ahead. And as you keep moving in this quiet resolve, you begin to notice how different your inner world feels when it is no longer constantly invaded by emotional noise. Your thoughts become cleaner. Your decisions become firmer. You no longer second guess every feeling or overanalyze every interaction. That is the gift of distance. It restores your ability to hear your own discernment without interference. And this is something people rarely talk about because clarity threatens dynamics that depend on confusion. Chosen ones, the anger you sense from her is also connected to entitlement. Some people unconsciously believe they are entitled to your time, your attention, your emotional labor. They grow accustomed to you being available, responsive, understanding, even when it costs you. And when you remove yourself, it feels to them like something has been taken away. But you did not take anything that belonged to her. You simply reclaimed what was always yours. What they didn't tell you is that silence exposes entitlement faster than confrontation ever could. Confrontation invites debate. Silence invites reflection. And reflection is uncomfortable for those who never examined how they showed up. That discomfort often transforms into anger because anger feels more powerful than vulnerability. It is easier to be mad at you than to look inward. You may also notice that your absence creates stories. Stories about why you left. Stories about who you are now. Stories designed to protect egos and avoid responsibility. Let them talk. Chosen ones do not need to defend their character to people committed to misunderstanding their growth. Your consistency will speak louder than any explanation you could give. As time passes, the intensity of the reaction may fluctuate. Some days it feels heavy, like emotional pressure from afar. Other days it fades into the background. This is because energy seeks resolution. When it cannot get a response, it searches for another outlet. That is why staying grounded is important. Do not confuse energetic noise with a sign you should re-engage. It is simply the residue of a connection dissolving. What they didn't tell you is that not all connections end with closure conversations. Some end with clarity. And clarity does not always require mutual understanding. Sometimes clarity is one-sided, and that is enough. You don't need agreement to move forward. You need alignment. Chosen ones, you were not placed here to carry emotional burdens that were never yours. You were not meant to be the regulator of someone else's stability. You were not meant to stay connected to dynamics that drain your spirit. And when you finally accept that, the guilt begins to dissolve. You start to see that choosing yourself was not selfish, it was necessary. That woman's anger also reflects a loss of emotional leverage. When you cared deeply and communicated openly, she had insight into your inner world. She knew what mattered to you, what hurt you, what moved you. Silence removes that access, and when someone loses access to your inner landscape, they feel disoriented. That disorientation often shows up as frustration directed outward. What they didn't tell you is that privacy is power. When you stop sharing everything, when you stop explaining your decisions, when you stop seeking validation, you reclaim authority over your own narrative. You no longer need approval to move forward. And that independence shifts how others perceive you. Some will respect it, others will resent it. Both reactions tell you who is aligned and who is attached. As you continue walking, you may notice that new connections feel different. They don't demand immediate access. They don't thrive on emotional intensity. They respect your pace. That contrast will confirm why the old dynamic had to end. Growth always reveals what no longer fits. Chosen ones, there is also a deeper lesson unfolding here. Silence teaches you restraint. It teaches you that not every emotion needs expression and not every thought needs to be shared. It builds discipline in how you engage with the world, and discipline is essential for where you are headed. You cannot carry unfiltered access into a season that requires focus and discernment. What they didn't tell you is that chosen ones often experience isolation before expansion. The quiet period is not punishment, it is preparation. It clears space. It strengthens intuition. It refines boundaries. And those who cannot walk with you through that quiet are not meant to walk with you into what comes next. That woman's anger may also be mixed with fear. Fear that she misjudged you. Fear that she underestimated your ability to walk away. Fear that she lost something valuable without realizing it at the time. Fear often hides behind anger because anger feels less vulnerable, but her emotions are not yours to manage. You may feel moments where compassion arises, where you understand her perspective. That compassion does not require reconnection. You can understand without re-entering. You can forgive without reopening doors. Forgiveness is internal. Access is external. And chosen ones learn to separate the two. What they didn't tell you is that silence protects your future. Every time you resist the urge to re-engage, you prevent old patterns from interfering with new opportunities. You keep your energy clean. You keep your focus intact. And focus is crucial now, even if you don't fully see why yet. As days turn into weeks and weeks into months, the emotional charge attached to this situation will continue to fade. Not because it didn't matter, but because you integrated the lesson. You learned what you needed to learn. And once a lesson is learned, it no longer needs to repeat. Chosen ones, the version of you who cut communication is stronger than the version who stayed and hoped. That strength will continue to grow the more you honor it. You will saint art trusting yourself in new ways. Making decisions without over-explaining, saying no without guilt, walking away without drama. These are not small changes. They are foundational shifts. What they didn't tell you is that chosen ones often trigger transformation in others simply by leaving. Your absence forces people to confront what they avoided. Whether they grow from it or resist it is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to continue forward without compromising your integrity. You may notice that life begins to respond differently to you. Opportunities align. Conversations feel more purposeful. Your energy feels less scattered. That is because you are no longer leaking energy into places that could not sustain it. Silence sealed those leaks. And as you remain in this space, grounded and observant, you will see how much of your past exhaustion was tied to emotional overextension, how much of your confusion came from mixed signals, how much of your anxiety came from trying to maintain connections that required you to abandon yourself. This awareness is part of your healing. Chosen ones, trust the stillness, trust the distance, trust the decision you made when you chose yourself over familiarity. The anger you sense from her is temporary. The clarity you gained is lasting. And as you continue moving forward in this quiet strength, allowing the echoes of the past to fade, staying aligned with what feels steady rather than what feels intense, you will keep unfolding into a version of yourself that no longer needs to be understood by everyone, no longer needs to be accessible to everyone, no longer needs to explain every step. As you continue walking deeper into this season, carrying only what aligns, releasing what no longer serves, and remaining grounded in the awareness that the silence you chose was not an ending, but part of an ongoing, unfolding T continues to move with you, step by step, breath by breath, forward. And as this unfolding continues, you begin to recognize how much strength it took to choose stillness over reaction. Not everyone has the courage to sit with their own resolve without seeking validation, but chosen ones are built for this kind of discipline. You are learning that not every message deserves a reply, not every emotion deserves expression, and not every relationship deserves continuation. This awareness doesn't harden you, it refines you. There will be moments when you sense her energy circling back, not through words, but through memory, through sudden thoughts, through emotional echoes that seem to arise without warning. This is not weakness on your part, it is residue. Connections do not dissolve instantly, especially ones that were emotionally charged, but residue fades when it is not fed, and each time you choose not to engage, you weaken its hold. What they didn't tell you is that silence recalibrates your nervous system. When you remove yourself from emotionally unpredictable dynamics, your body begins to relax. You stop bracing for the next reaction, the next misunderstanding, the next emotional shift. Peace becomes your baseline instead of something you chase. And once peace becomes familiar, chaos becomes intolerable. Chosen ones, you are also learning discernment at a deeper level. You are starting to see the difference between intensity and intimacy. Intensity is loud, urgent, consuming. Intimacy is steady, respectful, grounded. The connection you walked away from thrived on intensity, not depth. Silence exposes that difference. It reveals that what felt strong was often just overwhelming. That woman's anger is also tied to the loss of influence over your emotional state. When someone can no longer provoke you, soothe you, upset you, or pull you back in, they lose rel. Advance in your inner world. For some, relevance is tied to identity. Losing it feels like erasure. But your inner world is not a public space, it is sacred. And access to it must be earned, not assumed. What they didn't tell you is that chosen ones are often targeted emotionally because of their empathy. You feel deeply, you listen, you give space. And people mistake that for endless capacity. Silence corrects that misunderstanding. It teaches others that your empathy is not permission to overstep. It teaches you that your kindness must be paired with boundaries. As you continue forward, you may notice that your reactions to other situations also change. You are less impulsive, less reactive, less emotionally hooked. This is not detachment from life, it is mastery over your responses. You are no longer ruled by emotional tides that rise and fall based on external behavior. You are anchored. Chosen ones, anchoring yourself was necessary before what comes next. You cannot build something stable on emotional volatility. You cannot step into higher responsibility while constantly managing unresolved dynamics. Silence cleared the ground. It removed distractions that competed for your attention. And attention is currency. Where you place it determines what grows. What they didn't tell you is that silence forces people to face themselves without your presence to buffer the experience. Some will grow, some will resent you for it. Either way, your role is complete. You were never meant to stay to make it comfortable. You were meant to move when it was time. There may be moments when you feel tempted to check, just to see if things have shifted. But remember, curiosity can reopen doors that clarity already closed. Trust what you knew when you left. That knowing came from accumulated experiences, not a single moment. And wisdom respects patterns, not promises, chosen on. Your silence is also teaching you patience. You are learning to let time reveal truth instead of forcing resolution. Time has a way of exposing intentions, motives, and consistency. When you step back, you allow people to show who they are without your influence. And what they show you in your absence matters more than what they said in your presence. What they didn't tell you is that some people perform growth when you are watching. Silence removes the audience. And without an audience, authenticity becomes unavoidable. That is why reactions intensify when you disappear. There is no one left to impress. As your journey continues, you may notice a subtle confidence emerging. Not arrogance, not defensiveness, just quiet certainty. You trust your instincts more. You hesitate less. You feel less need to justify your decisions. This confidence was always there, but it was buried under the weight of over-explaining and over-giving. Chosen ones, understand this. You didn't just cut communication with a person. You cut communication with a version of yourself that tolerated misalignment. And that is why returning feels impossible. Growth changes your internal standards. Once your standards shift, old dynamics feel foreign. What they didn't tell you is that chosen ones often grieve what could have been, not what was. You may grieve the potential, the imagined future, the version of her that you hoped would show up. That grief is real, and it does not mean you made the wrong choice. It means you cared, but caring does not obligate you to stay. As you process this grief quietly without reopening wounds, you strengthen your emotional maturity. You learn that you can feel deeply without acting impulsively. You can acknowledge loss without reversing progress. This balance is crucial for your next chapter. Chosen ones, your next chapter will require discernment in who you allow close. Not everyone deserves access to your thoughts, your plans, your vulnerabilities. Silence trained you for this. It showed you the cost of overexposure. It taught you that privacy preserves power. What they didn't tell you is that chosen ones are often misunderstood in their quiet seasons. People assume something is wrong when you are simply aligned. They expect noise, explanation, reaction, but alignment is calm, and calm looks boring to those addicted to drama. As time goes on, the emotional charge attached to her anger will diminish further. Not because she changed, but because you did. You no longer internalize reactions that are not yours to carry. You observe without absorbing. This is emotional sovereignty. Chosen one's sovereignty is the ability to govern your inner world without external interference. Silence was your declaration of sovereignty, and once declared, it must be maintained, not with rigidity, but with consistency. You may encounter moments when she tries to reframe the past, to soften it, to minimize what happened. But memory without accountability is manipulation. Trust what your body felt when you were still there. Trust the exhaustion. Trust the confusion. Those sensations were information. What they didn't tell you is that chosen ones often receive confirmation after they leave, not before. Clarity sharpens with distance. Patterns become obvious. Red flags align into pictures. Silence gives you perspective that proximity never could. As you integrate these realizations, you become less reactive to external narratives. You no longer feel the urge to correct misunderstandings. You let truth stand on its own. This is not indifference, it is self-respect. Chosen ones, continue honoring the decision you made. Continue choosing steadiness over stimulation. Continue trusting that what feels peaceful is guiding you correctly. The anger you sensed was never meant to pull you back. It was meant to show you that your absence mattered more than your presence ever did. And as you keep walking forward in this awareness, grounded and unshaken, allowing silence to do its quiet work within you, you will find that what once felt heavy now feels distant. What once felt urgent now feels irrelevant. And what once demanded your energy no longer has a place in your inner world. As you continue unfolding, refining, and strengthening step by step, without the need to return, without the need to explain, without the need to reopen what has already served its purpose, moving forward in this ongoing journey that continues to reveal itself as you go. Chosen ones, let this be the moment you fully release the need to look back for validation, explanation, or emotional resolution. You did not lose your way when you chose silence, you found it. You did not abandon anyone, you honored yourself. What ended was not love, not connection, not purpose, but a version of life that required you to stay smaller than you were meant to be. The anger you encountered was never proof that you were wrong, only confirmation that your absence revealed truths your presence had been shielding. And now, standing where you are, steadier, clearer, and more grounded than before, you no longer need to announce your growth or justify your distance. Let your peace be the evidence. Let your consistency be the answer. Let your forward movement speak for itself. Some people were meant to walk with you, others were meant to teach you, and some were only meant to know the version of you that you have outgrown. Bless the lesson, release the weight, and keep walking without hes. Because the silence you chose did not end your story. It positioned you to finally live it aligned, unburdened, and fully in your power.